The Catnap mod just dropped in FNF, and people have been asking me to explain the lore for Catnap, and since the update for Poppy Playtime 3 has been pushed back to 2024, this seems like the perfect time to jump into it. Now, I'm sure that most of you are familiar with the game franchise called Poppy Playtime and all the monstrosities that have come from the game, like Huggy Wuggy and Boxy Boo. But now we have been introduced to the newest edition that goes by the name of Catnap and also comes with a box set of smiling critters. And from the recent trailers and videos that have been posted on the Mob Entertainment YouTube channel, we have a pretty good idea of what's going on with Catnap. Now, from what I understand, it sounds like Catnap was a part of the Smiling Critter toy collection, which reminds me a lot of the Care Bears from back in the day. Put down in the comments if you actually remember them. Now, each of these little guys has a small backstory that talks about their personality and also their scent. So here we see that Bubba is the brains of the critters and he smells like lemongrass. Bobby is kind and caring and smells like roses. Crafty Corn is a artsy type of critter and smells like jasmine. Kickin' Chicken is the cool critter and he smells like Lang Lang, and I think you kind of see the trend that's going on here. These toys were so popular that they even got like a promotional cartoon that was made for them.
The wind's really scary. I can't sleep.
Hey, we'll be okay, guys. I promise. All winds blow away. Eventually. Catnap! Please, help us go to sleep, Catnap!
We need it, Catnap!
Please help us!
Sleep! Sleep! Sleep!
Now, a few things really stood out for me in this video. The first being how ominous Catnap seemed, even though the other critters really act like he's a good guy. The second thing that stood out to me was the fact that Catnap's gas not only puts people to sleep, but also seems to make them joyful, almost to the point of seeming like hysterical, which becomes a lot darker when we actually figure out what Catnap's job is at the Playtime Corporation facility. And the last thing that really stood out to me was at the end of the video, Catnap obviously looks creepy as hell here, but the critters don't even seem to be like they're sleeping. They almost look like they're dead, or at the very least like empty husk, which gives off the vibe that Catnap can do more than simply put people to sleep. Now, things got even darker when the Catnap recall video dropped, because it showed us that when the critters were actually sold to the general public, the Catnap dog caused a ton of issues for small children.
Everyone knows Huggy Wuggy and Poppy Playtime, but are your children safe from Playtime Co.'s latest toy? What you've seen here is Playtime Co.'s own Smiling Critters, a limited series cartoon meant to celebrate the release of the toys sharing its name. Yet both now face the fire sparked by the inclusion of one key member. This is Catnap. And like the others of his line, you just pull his little tail and seems innocent enough. However, parents across the country report their children experiencing strange and often violent nightmares. And beside them, their little, grinning Catnap doll. Now, with controversy growing, Playtime Co. has announced the recall of all Catnap toys from the Smiling Critters line. His image cleared from all promotional material. But damage already done, will disappearing be that easy? The exact cause of these incidents still unknown, only one thing appears glaringly certain. Your children are not safe with Catnap.
Now, what I find interesting here is that the Catnap dog seemed to be the only one that was causing issue for the children, which didn't make sense until I learned what Catnap actually does in the facility. It seems like Catnap basically acted as a caretaker of sort for the children in a location called the Play Care, which is basically like a underground orphanage called Home Sweet Home. And this is where the children who were being experimented on and used to create the living toys basically lived. And it seems like Catnap used his gas to keep these children sedated while they were living in these terrible situations and being used as basically human guinea pigs. And from the sounds of the recall video, it seems like the actual Catnap gas got into the toys, which is why the children who purchased the toys were having these horrific nightmares. And this is really sad to think about because that means that the children trapped in the orphanage probably also had terrible nightmares every night because they actually have to live with Catnap as their caretaker. And knowing that, it also explains this document that I actually found on the website here. And to sum up this cross-department report, basically it's the different staff just talking about the different stages of Catnap's progression after they had been transformed into a living toy. And one of the things that stood out for me in this report is the fact that while some of the children did actually take a liking to Catnap, there's a lot of kids that never actually felt comfortable with the cat there. And I think part of this may be due to the fact that Catnap has the ability to give these children nightmares. Maybe not every one of them, but definitely a few of them at least. Now, something else that stood out when researching Catnap is that Catnap's personality originally was described as being gentle, bashful, and more importantly, highly impressionable. And impressionable basically just means that a person is easy to influence or manipulate. And this explains how Catnap goes from being described as a lovable caretaker, in a way of course, to being basically a zealot. And what I mean by this is that at some point the prototype starts to manipulate Catnap and they basically start to see the prototype as a literal god. And when you look into Catnap's history, the staff on site said that Catnap would act like a pet to Prototype, following him around like an actual kitten, and his obsession led him to create like a primitive religion where the Prototype was basically the god. And what's really disturbing here is that anybody who didn't actually follow this religion was basically sacrificed, and we kind of see that in this newest trailer where Dog Days is actually chained up.
And this is what he does to heretics.
And while some of you may be thinking that Catnap doesn't look that intimidating, just remember that he can be the same size or larger than Huggy Wuggy, but he also has the ability to shrink his body down to like the size of a rat. And while I first thought that may not sound like a big deal, but this basically means that he could definitely stalk you without being seen, because think about how many rats are small animals that can be around and you would never know. And I think more importantly, this means that he can get into pretty much any part of the facility if he wants to. And what I think a lot of people forget is that he also has the ability to put you to sleep, which is going to make him very hard to actually get away from or to fight. And then of course, if you look at a lot of these trailers, you see that he has a bunch of scratches on the wall. And when you look at this image here, you're reminded that he has those huge cat claws. And all of this to say that Catnap is definitely a daunting foe if you're trying to 1v1 or even just trying to get away from him. Which sadly is kind of the reason that they put him in charge of the children. It wasn't necessarily because he was just a gentle soul and would be a good caretaker, but it's for the simple fact that it's very hard to get away from him, especially if you're like a 6-year-old kid. There's no shot. Now, I think the last point that I want to touch on here is what Catnap was like before he actually was turned into a living doll. Now, originally, Catnap was a young man named Theodore who was an orphan at Home Sweet Home, and he was well known by the staff to be the kid with the imaginary friend. And this imaginary friend would basically whisper suggestions on how Theodore could help sabotage the Playtime Corporation. And as I'm sure a lot of you have probably already guessed, this imaginary friend was actually Prototype all along, which kind of explains why Catnap is so obsessed with him. It's basically like a feeling that was carried over from when he was still a human and now is in his Catnap form. And I'm sure most of you probably can understand, like as a young kid, an imaginary friend is kind of a big deal. So it kind of makes sense that Catnap in his new form would still hold a bond with Prototype. And this is especially true when you remember that Prototype isn't imaginary. Prototype was probably one of the only real beings that this kid had to talk to that seemed like a friend, even though Prototype was actually just trying to use him so that he could sabotage this whole facility. But when you think about how this kid was basically used by the Playtime Corporation and by this Prototype figure, right? Obviously for different purposes, but still being used, it almost makes Catnap seem like a sympathetic character. But I think we'll just have to wait until the game comes out to really be able to say that for sure, because while on the surface it kind of seems like Catnap is a victim, I think the way the character behaves in game and how cruel the character actually is may actually sway people the other way. So we'll just have to wait and see. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to check out this video on the screen here and let me know down in the comments if you would like to see me actually play through Poppy Playtime 3 and give like a full explanation once the new update drops.